Now to Hungary, where Prime Minister Viktor Orban is under pressure. Elections are being held on Sunday. And for the first time in his 16-year rule, the polls aren't looking good for him. So he's called in the big guns from Washington to help.
Hello, Mr. President. How are you?
Hi. Hey, JD, could you give me a second?
This is clearly more than just a charm offensive. US Vice President JD Vance campaigning for Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban and putting his boss Donald Trump on the speakerphone at an election rally in Budapest. A last-minute boost from the Trump administration. Vance and his wife Usha arrived just a few days before Hungarians turn out to vote, and Orban certainly needs support. His challenger Peter Magyar, running on a pro-Europe platform, is 10 points ahead of Orban's right-wing nationalist Fidesz in the polls. After 16 years in power, Orban is fighting for his political survival this coming Sunday. In Budapest, Vance praised Orban's track record, blaming the European Union rather than the Prime Minister for Hungary's problems.
I did want to send a signal to everybody, particularly the bureaucrats in Brussels who have done everything that they can to hold down the people of Hungary because they don't like the leader who has actually stood up for the people of Hungary.
Vance claimed EU officials have attempted to destroy the Hungarian economy to influence Sunday's election. Orban hopes to capitalise on this support.
It has been 35 years since a vice president last visited Hungary, and we have not had such a high-ranking guest from the United States for 20 years. 20 years is a long time between friends. With the election of President Trump, a golden age has dawned in our relations. As we have just looked at 2025, we see it was a year of records in economic cooperation.
Mr. President, you are on with about 5,000 Hungarian patriots, and I think they love you even more than they love Viktor Orban.
I'll tell you, he's a fantastic man. We've had a tremendous relationship.
All the same, election analysts believe that Vance's visit is unlikely to have much impact on the outcome of the election.
Well, Dalibor Rohac is a senior fellow at the conservative think tank, the American Enterprise Institute, where he studies Central and Eastern European political and economic trends. He joins us from Arlington, Virginia in the United States. Welcome to DW. Let's start with the visit of the Vice President. What is the American interest in interfering in Hungary's election?
I mean, it is very hard to identify a legitimate US national interest in perpetuating Viktor Orban's hold on power. It is very much part of this ideological project to which JD Vance and Donald Trump have been central, which involves promoting nationalist and insurgent forces within Europe with the aim of paralyzing and perhaps destroying the European Union. But when you look at the actual policy track record of Viktor Orban during his 16 years in power, there is very little that he has done that would have been aligned with US interests in Europe. Hungary has been the conduit of Chinese investment, Chinese technology transfers from Europe. Hungary has been an outpost for Russian interests in Europe. And perhaps very saliently in the current situation, Hungary has also nurtured its relationship with Iran. Viktor Orban visited Iran in 2015. Foreign Minister Szijjártó has been a visitor to Tehran. There are around 2,000 Iranian students studying in Hungary, and this is one of the sort of oddities of the current era that you have Moscow and Washington essentially and Tehran campaigning, so to speak, on the same side of this Hungarian election.
Right. So, well, as you say, we are in a very peculiar world at the moment. Viktor Orban's been in power for 16 years, longer than any of his EU counterparts. What has he done, or what has the opposition done, that means he's in trouble this time?
Well, when you look at his track record, Hungary has turned from being one of the success stories of post-communist transitions into one of the poorest countries in the EU. On some metrics of consumption, real per capita consumption, Hungary is in fact the poorest country in the EU. According to Transparency International, it is also the most corrupt country in the EU. while it's been one of the most important recipients of EU funds, EU subsidies, to the order of 47 billion euros since Hungary's accession. So it's not a success story, and it's very easy to compare it to some of its neighbors. You look at the extraordinary economic success of Poland, for example, which has leveraged EU investment and EU money into productive uses. You compare it with Hungary, where a small clique close to Viktor Orban have made tremendous fortunes, while the country is growing at much than the EU average and is coping with an increasing public debt problem.
So tell us then about Viktor Orban's main competitor, Peter Magyar. Isn't he cut from the same conservative nationalist cloth?
I suppose in a country that is centre-right by nature, so to speak, it actually helps to have the main challenger, the main competitor to Viktor Orban to be coming from the centre-right. So Peter Magyar is the former husband of the now disgraced Fidesz Justice Minister, Judith Varga, who was implicated in the scandal surrounding presidential pardons to people who were covering up sexual scandals, sex abuse in one of the government-run orphanages. He is running on a centre-right platform. He actually sounds like a bit of a Ukraine skeptic, but he also says that he's going to repair Ukraine's standing in Europe and its relationships with key European allies. And he is somebody who has really leveraged the anger that exists within Hungary at the policy record of Fidesz, whether it comes to corruption or whether it comes to poor economic growth or brain drain. I mean, Hungary has lost some 300,000 people since Viktor Orban came to power in 2010. So it's not a success story, and Hungarian voters are not blind to that fact.
So a quick word then about what might happen if Peter Magyar wins. We've seen in Poland how difficult it can be for a new government to regain control of state institutions when it replaces long-standing ideologically driven government, with those institutions often controlled by placemen. What sort of difficulties is a non-Orban government likely to face in Hungary?
Well, first and foremost, there is the question of the election and of a peaceful transfer of power and the contestability of the election itself. Hungary has a very complicated election system, which all but ensures that the opposition will have to have a large margin of victory to be able to safely claim a majority in the future parliament. And I think there might be some shenanigans coming into play between now and the election day, or perhaps in the vote count, that will aim at trying to keep Viktor Orban in power. But once successfully ousted, assuming that the election goes the opposition's way, the new government will have to deal with some pressing economic issues, the growing public debt problem, and it will also have to deal with a public administration, a judiciary, central bank that's been populated by Orban loyalists over those 16 years. It will also face a media landscape that's controlled by forces close to Fidesz. So it's going to be an uphill struggle.
Quite a struggle, as you say. Thanks for talking us through that, Dalibor. Dalibor Rohac from the American Enterprise Institute. Well, Donatien Rie is a foreign policy and transatlantic relations expert at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. She joins us from Annecy in France. Welcome to DW. Why does JD Vance appear to be interfering in Hungary's election? What's he doing there?
The vice president is in Hungary ostensibly to support Prime Minister Orban in his re-election campaign. We have very important elections in Hungary coming up on April 12. That's this coming Sunday. And we know the U.S. administration, especially the U.S. president and Prime Minister Orban, have a very close personal relationship. And Viktor Orban also has a good relationship with the vice president. Therefore, this administration wanted to send somebody to represent this support in Orban's campaign.
So have we all now given up on this notion of not interfering in each other's elections, or is this just an American thing?
It is quite unusual. There has been this unspoken agreement for a very long time that among democracies, and especially in the transatlantic alliance, there would not be this kind of overt support of one side over another in a mostly democratic election and mostly democratic country. The closest we have come in the last, say, 10 years is when President Obama went to the UK right before the Brexit vote. But as we know, this was a referendum, not an election, and especially not an election between such different options and two very different paths for Hungary forward.
So what does this tell us then about Viktor Orban's campaign? Is this him showing off, I've got big friends in America? Or is this him saying, well, I'm that desperate that I need to go out of the country for support?
I would say it's one because of the other. Viktor Orban is quite desperate. This is, as we've heard a lot in the news in the last few weeks, the fight of his political life. And because of this, he is desperate to pull out all the stops, to find support wherever he can. But doing that, he hopes to project this strength, to say, look at me, I have very powerful allies, I can still get the backing of the United States, and that makes Hungary, and therefore Viktor Orban, a very important player on the world stage.
OK, so that's what's in it for Viktor Orban. What's in it for the Trump White House? Why do he and his followers care who runs this tiny middle European country?
There's a couple different things that explain why the support is coming at such an important time, just a few days before the election. On the one hand, there's an ideological alignment. We saw this in the late 2025 national security strategy. There's a clear declaration that this U.S. administration will support conservative governments in Europe in this pursuit of stemming civilizational erasure. And they see Viktor Orban as a standard bearer of this civilizational project of protecting the West from its quote-unquote decadence. So there's an ideological alignment there, and Vice President JD Vance is very much a representative of that movement. At the same time, there's a close personal friendship between President Trump and Viktor Orban that explains this support and why the president might want to send this kind of firepower. Is also a sort of return of the favor, because back in 2016, Viktor Orban was one of the very first world leaders to support Donald Trump in the US presidential election and maintained his support for the last 10 years, including after very disputed elections and the January 6th insurrection. Viktor Orban never moved away from Donald Trump and his camp. He has stayed in close contact and maintained his support for the administration. So there's an ideological perspective here, but there's also just personal attachment to Orban as a leader who has supported the president.
Right, and we know how much the president likes loyalty. We are, however, living in odd times. Even so, it seems particularly peculiar. We just heard the clip from the vice president there praising Viktor Orban's approach to energy security, which is essentially buying cheap oil from Russia and thereby funding Russia's war against Ukraine. So Vice President Vance says that, while Donald Trump has spent so many years shouting at European leaders for their dependence on Russian oil.
It is a very odd moment, as you said. I agree with this. I'm not sure I can easily explain this statement, and I don't think I can describe Hungary's energy strategy as pursuing energy security. It just so happens that in current conditions, perhaps Russian oil and gas is most secure because, as we know, gas and oil from the Middle East is stuck because of the war in Iran. But it is a very strange statement from the U.S. administration. And that's where also we realize that this alignment between the two countries is ideological to some extent, but is not consistent all the way when it comes to at least the United States' stated goals on the international stage, when it comes to Russia, but also when it comes to NATO's interests, anything like this. Hungary's policies have actually not pursued energy security, and they have actually maintained a lifeline to some extent for Russia.
A quick word about the election, which is on Sunday, it's in about a week. Viktor Orban's been in power for the last 16 years. He's now facing real competition for the first time. Tell us about Peter Magyar and his TISA party? Because just because he's against Orban in this election doesn't necessarily make him sort of warm and cuddly, does it?
That is a pretty funny description, but I think you're accurate here. Peter Magyar is, I think what's really important for your audience to understand is he actually was in the Fidesz party, which is Orban's party, for a long time, and then split away from them just a few years ago on the back of a pretty significant scandal inside the government that had to do with a pardon for someone related to a child abuse case. And for Magyar, that was kind of the breaking point of what he thought represented the corruption inside the regime and the cronyism that had grown too far. So he is not, in fact, a warm and cuddly figure. He's quite conservative in a lot of his views, but he is determined to run on an anti-corruption platform. So if you look at some economic policies or social policies in his platform and in TISA's platform, you're not going to see a massive difference. We're not talking about a center-left or a left-wing party here, but the core of his platform is really to move away from the power centralization that we've seen under Orban and Fidesz and try to restore Hungary to his previous democratic state, or at least do away with this complete capture of the state by Orban.
All right. OK, that election on Sunday. Donatien Roy from the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.